Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Startup Cafe. This is a live recording of the Conscious Profits Unfiltered podcast, which is my podcast. So for those of you that are listening on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple, we are recording live with a live audience here at the Kinn in Venice, California, which is a hub for conscious entrepreneurs. So if you'd like to find out more about the Kinn, you can talk to Taylor right here or scan the QR at the front as well and check out the space. It's a wonderful, wonderful community that we're building here. So Jeff, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Startup Cafe. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. One of the things that I like to ask my guests when I first ask them is, what was your last oh shit moment? First thing that comes to mind that was an oh shit for you. Could be bad or good, really.
Wow, I don't know if I should share this.
Please do. That's how you know you really got to share it, because now you got everybody's attention.
Okay, so we were coming down here to Venice Beach from British Columbia. I spent 2 years in a Mexican jail for drug trafficking. And when I put my bag through baggage, I realized there was some ketamine in my bag.
I've had like 72 oh shit moments that I've had on my podcast. That's the best one by far. Oh, that's good. So, what happened?
Well, there's nothing else to do but pray, right? That everything went well. And it did.
Pray. I love that. Jeff, well, my next question was going to be about something you talk about, which is being unstoppable. So what does it mean to be unstoppable other than being able to smuggle drugs across countries?
Well, I think in its simplest form, the TLDR is just don't stop. And I think it's that simple. And yet we have a lot of reasons that our mind comes up with that seem justified, that would stop us from moving forward in our lives. But they're not real. And our job is to identify that and to connect with that part of ourselves that is unstoppable, that is constantly changing, moving, growing, evolving, expanding, and let go of that small self and that small identity and all the reasons why we can't, and connect with that part of ourselves that doesn't know anything else but to do that thing.
That's beautiful. Are there moments that you consider where rest and really stopping is important, and that's actually also part of being unstoppable?
Absolutely. Self-care is huge, and it's a huge component of that is preparing ourselves to be in that mindset, to be connected to that part of ourselves that is unstoppable. And if we don't take that time, then we get wrapped up in the day-to-day and all the small things and in the small self, and we lose that part of ourselves that can propel us through any challenge.
Jeff, you talk about embodied leadership. Can you talk about that concept? What does embodied leadership really mean? How do we integrate it into our lives?
Well, I think it's a necessary piece right now, because we've been so identified with our mind, with these different constructs of how to show up in the world. As spirituality has moved into the West, and I just had a conversation with a fellow here as we were getting ready to go of course, modalities of spirituality would hit the West at a superficial layer because that's where we were at. And now that we've had time to start to integrate that and allow it to percolate into our culture, we're recognizing that there's a deeper need to not go do the yoga class, do the meditation class, do the breathwork thing. It's like we need to be that. That's a lifestyle. And so the way that we're living and what we're embodying is important. And to be a leader in the world, we need to be a leader in our life. And that means when nobody's looking, what are the things that we're doing? What kind of life are we living? And who are we really at our core? And then that's the medicine that we bring to the world, is this deep embodied wisdom. That's not something that we read in a book. It's not something that we heard on a podcast. It's something that we know from our personal experience.
I love that. Love that, Jeff. I don't know how many of y'all think about that concept of embodiment. Like how many of you think about the word embodiment and what that means to you? Love this crowd. This is great. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing. I think about that. I think about it a lot personally when I meditate a lot on gratitude, and I realized that for years I was meditating on gratitude up here and just being grateful and thinking about things that I was grateful for and all these things. And then it made a huge switch for me when I started embodying the gratitude and feeling the gratitude in my body, and it was a completely different thing for me. So I love the concept that you're talking about, embodied leadership and all these things that you go out and do. How do you really be those things on a daily basis? So it's a lovely concept to think about on a daily basis, really.
So important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can intellectualize anything, but to actually become it changes everything.
Exactly. So you talk a lot about all kinds of biohacking modalities and things like that. And there's so much buzz around biohacking and all these things you can do to, at least specifically here in LA, it can be overwhelming, really. So are there some practices that you feel are truly, digestible for busy humans to really integrate into their daily lives if they're not really doing any of them? And then also we can get deeper into it.
Yeah, I tend to gravitate towards the simple, practical tools. And so for me, I like to weave the things that I'm doing into life. We're always breathing. All day long, every day of our life, we're breathing. So for me, that's a really easy tool to integrate into our life if we can understand more about our breath and to recognize that our breath represents the way that we live. And we can start to tune into that on a moment-to-moment basis. Then we can learn a lot about ourselves and we can really shift in the moment, in real time, the way that we're navigating through life. So I tend to really gravitate towards those really simple tools. And the other tools that I utilize, again, it's the embodied wisdom that arises from using these modalities. So, cold exposure, it's like, what are you learning from that practice that's applicable to your life? And how can you make the next intense conversation that you have the cold bath?
Do you think about that? So if you're having an intense conversation or you're going through something in your daily life, a challenge or something like that, do you actually think about it consciously? Oh, when I was in that ice bath and I was at, minute, 1 and 52 seconds and I had to push through it. Or is it more of a subconscious thing that happens with so much practice for you?
Well, I think eventually it becomes woven into the fabric of who we are. But in the beginning, it's a very conscious act. I worked as paramedic for many years. And when I first got into cold exposure, I would practice when I would get woken up in the middle of the night to go on a code 3 call for like a cardiac arrest or something. I'd be putting on my uniform and I would be thinking about the moment that I submerged in the ice bath and how I would calm myself in that moment to bring that into that aspect of my life.
And I assume breath was the biggest thing.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Breath is the thing. Breath is life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you shared a little bit about your background here, what you were doing, and we also know that you were in jail for a couple of years. And so I'm like, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and how you came up to all of this? Because I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I'm from Revelstoke, BC. I grew up in a small mountain town and had a pretty intense upbringing and had a lot of experiences, a lot of good experiences, a lot of really challenging experiences as well. And so came from a background of some pretty intense mental, physical, emotional, sexual experiences that really left a mark that I would need to address later in life. Mm. And so my path to coping through that time was through school and academia. and really being a good student. That was a way that I learned to receive love. If I did really well in school, I got love. And so I was a really good student, and I loved to study, and I loved to learn, and I loved to read. And so I graduated and went off to university to go be a neurosurgeon. And prior to that, I'd found alcohol, in the last couple of years at high school, went off to university, no more rules, nobody to tell me not to do anything. And so that started on a path of exploration. And really at that point, I really had a chip on my shoulder, and maybe it's still there, towards authority, towards institutions, towards people telling me what to do. I'd kind of had enough of that by that point in my life. And so I really rebelled, and I'd really been that good boy, trying to be the people pleaser. And I remember a moment where I thought, what would it feel like to be really bad? And so I dove down that hole for many years. And I moved back to my hometown. My family's business was in forestry. And I found a whole group of people that had that same chip on their shoulder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was there.
And so through my 20s, I worked in forestry, and I had a number of really intense and severe accidents. And so I had my first near-death experience at 19. I had another.
What was that like?
It was intense. It was being out in the mountains in BC, working by myself, and rolling over a quad, over a steep bank, a steep rocky bank, and waking up at the bottom of that bank and bleeding profusely.
Wow.
And having a long ways to walk to find somebody.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah. So that was number one. And then number 2 and 3 came years after that. And after number 2, that was the first wave of OxyContin. And I was an explorer of substances, and I thought, wow, this is great, and I jumped on that wave. And I rode it for a number of years.
Okay.
Until I realized that, wow, this thing is a monster.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had been experimenting with other hard drugs at that time. And after those first couple of years, which I often refer to as 2 of the best years of my life, I really dove into that deep, deep hole of addiction and really lost everything that I'd worked for, and lost my family, girlfriend, all the pieces. Ended up on the downtown east side in Vancouver, which is pretty famous for its drug use. And at a certain point realized that I just needed to get far, far away from everything that I knew and everybody that I knew. And, there's people telling me, you should do this, you should do that. And I knew that I already knew what to do, and I just needed to do it. And so eventually I took off, and I ended up in Mazatlan, Mexico. And on that journey, that was a pretty twisty journey to get there, and involved incarceration in a couple of your finer institutions here in this country. And ended up on the beach in Mazatlan. That had been a long journey to get there. And when I got there, I realized I didn't know what to do. And the only thing that I really knew how to do was be an addict at that point. And so I dove back into addiction and got to a point where I realized that I'm probably going to lose my life. Somebody will take my life, and I really need to change. Before I'd left, my best friend had said to me, he said, if you go far, far away and everything stays the same, then you'll know it was you.
Mm.
And so when I got there to this beach paradise, and everything started to manifest in the same way, I realized it was me and that I needed to change my life. That's when yoga, meditation, breathwork came in. And I became a really disciplined student of all of these different modalities, and it helped change my life. I opened up a restaurant called Karma Kitchen on the beach in Mazatlan, and was just working my butt off at that restaurant and just doing everything I could to kind of just get my head back above water. But I'd gone pretty deep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so at that point, at a certain point, I realized that I didn't have enough money to pay the rent at my restaurant and to pay my rent at my house that I was renting. And I'd met a man that worked for the Sinaloa Cartel when I first moved to Mazatlan. And so I went to the Cartel, worked with them for a couple of years, and eventually got busted with 2 tons of marijuana and went to jail in Mexico.
Jail in Mexico.
Jail in Mexico.
And in the U.S.
And in the U.S.
Wow.
And, that, interestingly enough, that was actually a beautiful experience and super, super powerful and real. Because when I arrived there, it felt like it was an exam in manifestation and being able to control my mind.
And I arrived in the jail.
I'd been studying these different modalities of meditation and yoga and learning about energy and manifestation. And I landed there, and it was kind of like I just got this message. It's like, okay, see if you can manifest your way out of here.
What's up, guys? I hope you're enjoying the show. If you love the show, please share it with a homie. It would mean the world to me. Also want to let you know that you can check out sebastiannam.com for more resources like this, and also www.goglobal.agency, a digital marketing agency that's end-to-end, helping purpose-driven and mission-driven brands scale their impact. Again, that's goglobal.agency or sebastiannam.com. Please hit me up straight up on Instagram, DM me, ask me questions. I'd love to connect with you and see what you thought about this episode or other episodes and what you want to hear more of. Much love. So when you had, when you discovered, because you were talking about discovering yoga, meditation, breath, and all of these things that were getting you out of addiction, but then after that, you went and started working for the cartel, right? While you were working for the cartel, you were doing your practices.
Oh, yeah. Every day.
Okay. Wow. So you're doing your practices, you're working for the cartel, then you get arrested again in Mexico. You get to jail, and you're like, how did I manifest all of this? And it was like this big test. So keep telling us. Tell us more.
Yeah. So I arrived there and arrived in an 11-foot by 11-foot room with 30 men. And the first thing I thought when I got to that room is, where am I going to practice yoga?
Yeah.
But I carved out a little space.
Yeah, just standing poses only.
No, it was full practice.
Nice.
Oh, yeah. And
what kind of looks were you getting?
Well, I got a lot of different looks. And yeah, some of them of admiration, some of them that were more invasive.
Yeah, that's admirable, brother. Yeah.
So I did my practice every day, and I recognized that the most important thing that I needed to do, as challenging as it was I needed to be okay to be there before I could create the next step.
You needed to surrender to your situation.
Yes. And that took a while, took about a year. And so I got to a place where I was in gratitude again.
Wow.
Where I was living in a vibration where I could create from.
Wow. So you were in that same cell that whole year with all those men in there?
We got out once a week for an hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're in there with 30 men packed in. You get out once a week for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
You somehow managed to continue your practices throughout the year and get to a state of, instead of completely losing your mind, you find a way to get into a state of gratitude and vibrate that energy while you're in jail, and you still have a year left. Do you know that you have a year left?
No, if I were to be sentenced, the sentence would be 10 to 25 years.
So at this point, you actually have no idea. It's kind of like a 50-50 shot whether you're going to get out in 10 years or 20. You don't really know.
No. Yeah.
Wow.
Full on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So
So I just kept with practices.
Yeah.
I kept with the affirmations. I lived, ate, breathed, drank, thought, spoke freedom.
Were you, when you were speaking, you just said spoke. So were you speaking to the others as well? Were you, I don't know if you speak Spanish or not, or
I learned Spanish.
you learned Spanish? Of course. And did you feel like you were getting some support too from the other men in jail? Were you inspired?
Not so much.
Okay. Were there some that you inspired?
There were some that were inspired, and yet that's a very primal experience. And so we start to form these primal ways of being, primal ways of dominance. And so when push came to shove, there was no support for the one white guy that spoke English in that Mexican jail.
Right. Right. Of course. Cannot imagine actually. To be honest. So at which point, you said you hit a point a year in where you've sort of fully surrendered, you've figured out a way to vibrate gratitude. Do you feel that at that point you sort of started creating a new reality around you that eventually got you out within that next year?
Yes,
okay. Absolutely. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was just a continuation of that same process of focusing on the practices every day, journaling, writing about the outcome that I wanted. Feeling that, breathing that.
Yeah.
It's all the cliche things,
right.
Like feel it as though it's already happened. It's real.
What was that? That was freedom? That was being out? Did you see yourself just being out, period? Were you seeing yourself being out, doing a new activity, with seeing a new family, new friends? Like, what was that vision you had?
There's a funny thing that happens when you're in jail, and after a certain period of time, it becomes very hard to imagine anything outside of that reality.
Yeah.
And yet there were a lot of synchronicities that happened during my time there. One of them was I received a magazine at one point. And in the very back of that magazine was a picture from the photographer that had taken the pictures for the magazine. And he had taken a picture from a place where I walked with my dogs every single day in Mazatlan. And so I cut that picture out and I put it on a piece of paper and I wrote out an affirmation. And that really helped to pull me out. And because I could feel that place, I knew what it felt like.
Wow. Wow. So Jeff, so tell us sort of how that transition out of that and into the modalities and practices that you teach today and you talk about today.
Well, there's a funny thing about that piece, because I knew that there was going to be other issues when I got out of that jail, but I could only focus on one thing at a time. That was a big thing to focus on.
Did you, so at that point, so when did you find out that you were going to be getting out of jail though?
About 2 weeks before I got out.
Oh, that's it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Wow. How did that feel?
It felt exactly as I felt it would.
Yeah.
And so from that jail, I went to immigration jail. I got out.
No way.
And they put me in a van and took me to Tijuana.
So how was that?
How was it?
How long was that?
That was a month.
Did you know it would be a month?
Well, no, I didn't really know what was going to happen there.
Well, the roller coaster.
But eventually, I ended up back in BC.
Oh.
And when I got back to BC, even though I'd ended up in jail for drug trafficking, I realized at that point, after that experience, that I really needed to align my life with what I believed in. And I really wanted to be of service. And I also need to make some money and get my feet back on the ground. And so I found an ad that was looking for a medic to work on the oil rigs. And I thought, well, I could be a medic or a paramedic. And so I did the training for paramedic school. I went to work for a few years. And as much as I'd been teaching when I was in Mazatlan, and as much as I wanted to start teaching again, I realized I first needed to get my feet back on the ground. And so I just stayed with my own practice for a number of years, worked as a paramedic, and had a lot of really great opportunities that landed in my lap along the way. And got to a certain point where I realized that I had my feet back on the ground and I could start to do what I really wanted to do, which was teach and share. And that was really like this, kind of like the first wave of breath work. And I'd seen the waves of yoga and meditation kind of rolled in. And breath had been such a key piece in my own healing and transformation that I thought, I want to learn everything I can about the breath, and I want to ride this wave.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent the next couple of years continuing to work as a paramedic and traveling around the world and learning from some of the best teachers that I could find. And then at a certain point had this idea of BreathArmy just kind of dropped in my lap. And I feel at this point I'm still learning about what BreathArmy is all about.
Love it. I love that. I was just thinking about the concept. A lot of people say like get high on your own supply when you're talking about breath. Did you ever think about that when you were sort of like, I can just, because you said you've been an addict your whole life. Yeah,
absolutely.
See, like this is the most organic, safest way to get high in a way is my own breath.
Mm-hmm. It's such a powerful piece, and yet I feel, and it's something that drew me into it for sure, and still is something that I still enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I think like many other practices, that can really be a distraction from the true power of the tool. And it can just become another coping mechanism for our lack of desire to really look at our own shit. And so we get high on our own supplies, so we actually don't need to look at what's going on. And so, and yet that's the perfect path to draw people in. And if people want to go deeper, eventually there's so much more, and there's so much power there. And it's, for me, it's all about how do we learn from these powerful practices, pieces that we can then integrate in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Jeff. Yeah, that's something I think about a lot too when I'm, maybe I'm stressed out or something's going on in my life. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go work out. I'm going to go do some yoga. I'm going to do a plunge. I'm going to do some breath work. But really, is that just coping? Is that just, covering what's actually really going on underneath that I could really do some work around, right? And so I think about these practices of making them part of my daily. Maybe the first thing I do is something that I really enjoy, as we were talking about embodiment, and something that makes me feel good and feel better. And I know it's good for me, as opposed to it being something that's used to cover up some shit that I'm going through, as you were saying.
Yeah, I think we often use these practices in that way. And yet there's a deeper layer of opportunity that's available through them. And I think it's just a process of the evolution of our own understanding of how to utilize these practices in a modern world.
Yeah.
Where we're not growing up and going to the ashram and living this yogic lifestyle. It's like we're here in LA. So how do we use these tools in the world that we're living in? And they're totally applicable, but we just need to find a new way of doing it. And that's fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. Jeff, you talk about being responsible for our own challenges. And I think most people will be like, well, challenges can be very much external things. They just happen to us. How can I take responsibility for an external thing that I have nothing to do with? Talk about that.
Because we live in a quantum reality. And that quantum reality is a self-reflexive feedback loop. So the one perceiving is not separate from the thing being perceived. The thing being perceived is a projection of the perceiver. And so when we recognize that we are projecting everything onto this canvas that we knew to be separate from us, and we recognize that it's actually not separate, that it's this projection, that we're projecting all of our unhealed traumas, our fears, as well as our conscious projections onto, then we can start to take responsibility for all of that, see everything as an opportunity to learn and to grow from. And we're just learning more about ourselves through every interaction, through every person I meet. I get to learn more about myself. Because at our core, we are all divine. We are all a spark of that divine. We are all one. And so truly, I'm learning more about myself through my interaction with you, because you and I are not separate. And so in that way, we also have to take responsibility for our creations. We need to take responsibility for this experience that we're creating. We're not a victim to this separate reality. We're creating it. But when we recognize that, then we can step into that role of the creator. But other than that, we're a victim to it. Life is happening to us, but life's not happening to us, it's happening for us. And so when we recognize that, then we can start to take ownership for these pieces of ourselves, these patterns that keep on showing up over and over in our life. And we can say, what can I learn from this? What is this teaching me? As opposed to, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening to me. That guy's such an asshole.
Right. Now, I mean, I'm with you on this. Clearly, it's something that you've gone deep on, and I've attempted to go quite deep on this stuff as well. I also think it's important, though, for people to not guilt themselves for it, right? So it'd be like, okay, one thing is I'm learning from all of these things. These are happening for me, and I'm going to learn from it. But it's also like, if, let's say, a loved one, you find out one of your very loved ones has cancer, it's like, oh, I'm responsible for my loved one's cancer. It's not quite like that, right? So it's not like you're kind of guilting yourself into like everything that's happening for you, right? Like blaming type thing. It's like, okay, no, how am I going to learn from this, right? So I think there's an important thing of people perceiving this concept as well, so that it doesn't become this thing of like, I am to fault for everything wrong type stuff. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's a phase of it, is thinking, oh my God, what have I done? And I am responsible for everything, and taking that on in a very personal way, but it's kind of like the small self taking it on, owning that guilt and the shame. But owning the guilt and the shame is a big piece in the expansion. It's a big piece to move through in order to really step into that place of being in our creative power and being in those higher frequencies and higher vibrations from which we can create. And so I think it's an important part of the process.
Beautiful, beautiful. So before we open it up here for some questions from the audience, I'll ask you just a couple of last questions. So we talked a bit about science and biohacking and spirituality and embodied leadership. Why do you think it's important to sort of integrate all of these concepts together? I think a lot of people think about spirituality as something very separate than leadership, or like their job or their daily lives and things like that. So I think a lot of us will compartmentalize things. How do you feel about the importance of really bringing it all together?
Well, I think the importance is that we've created a nightmare collectively. And that we're in a moment where it's so important to remember who we truly are, to remember that we are creative beings, and to utilize that creative power and potential to create a different world. But that starts inside. And so that's where these modalities become really important, because it's about looking inside. What do I need to shift within me, so that this thing that I'm observing shifts and changes? And I think that we're in that moment right now.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Jeff, what are 2 traits that a conscious leader must embody today? Top 2 traits for a conscious leader.
Well, I think you already said one of them. Embodiment is a huge piece. And I feel like the other trait is really doing the things, like walking the walk and being that person, whether anybody's watching or not. It's like, who are you behind closed doors? Who are you in your most intimate conversations? And can you really connect with this authentic expression of you? So maybe authentic is the word. Can you connect with that authentic expression of you that doesn't change when you're with different people in different situations. So I would go with authenticity and embodiment.
Embodiment. Love it. Beautiful, beautiful. So before we're going to open it up for any of you out there to ask any questions, but I did want to let you, Jeff, talk about, you have a workshop happening tonight here at the Kinn, yes?
Yeah.
So if you want to share that before we open it up to any questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're doing a 3-hour workshop tonight, and we'll talk a little bit more about the simple practical tools and how to implement those into life, as well as get into some movement, some deep breathing, getting high on our own supply, and having one of those big peak experiences as well, but also talking about how to integrate that into daily life. So it's
beautiful.
A great night.
That's awesome. Integration is so important.
Yes.
Yeah, this is something that I love to talk about. And actually, Oliver and I talked about it back in the day when he was on my podcast, and about the importance of integration. And it's like, sometimes like I think about it as like a 90-10 rule, where it's like 10% is awareness and then 90% is what you're doing with it and integrating it. So I love that you're not just having the experience tonight, but you're also going to be talking about integration, which is very, very important. So that's really exciting. So I hope you guys can make that tonight. So yeah, we'll go ahead and open it up. If we can give a mic out there. And if you guys are enjoying this conversation, by the way, and you don't follow the podcast, you can check it out. You can search my name, Sebastian Nam, on your podcast platform, and follow the pod for more amazing combos like these. So this gentleman up here, go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. Really powerful, your journey and everything that you shared there. My question's really about embodied leadership, and through my time working with communities, I know the importance of creating safety for the people within the team, within the community. When they feel safe, they're able to relax within their own body and bring through their biggest gifts in the biggest way. And I just wanted to know and hear your experience of how do you create safety to bring out the best in people within, like, and create a culture of thriving.
Yeah, I think for me that happens in that moment-to-moment daily life, and the relationship that we have with our breath and the relationship that we have with our nervous system. And we'll hear a lot about controlling the breath, controlling the nervous system. And for me, it's about developing that relationship and learning what safety feels like, and having experiences of safety, and then integrating that into the person that we are. And when we feel safe inside ourselves, then we can bring that safety into the containers that we create.
Thank you. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, thanks for your question.
Great question.
Yes. Hi. Thank you. My name is Micheleika, and this is it's something very new for me. I'm from the Netherlands here, just visiting, and you asked, who knows the concept of embodiment, and I'm like, okay, I think I need to go a couple steps back, because what about people that have never heard of the word, but I hear you explaining it, and I think I'm doing that. So could you go a couple steps back and explain to me what does embodiment mean, and how do you know if you're doing it or doing it right or whatever?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking. And yeah, I'll take you right back to a moment of insight that I had with that. And I was living in Mexico at the time. I'd been practicing yoga for a few years, and I was renting a house, and people would come through Mazatlan, and I lived in a 3-bedroom house, and I was there with my dogs. And so I had 2 empty bedrooms, and people would come and stay with me. A couple from California came through, and I was talking to them about a retreat that they had been in to Peak. And the woman explained to me that she had spent the last week just learning to be in her body. And when she said that, it was such a mic drop moment. I thought, what the fuck do you mean being in your body? And so that led me on a long journey of learning what does it mean to be in our body. And to me, the breath is a powerful anchor into that. And it's the bridge between the mind and the body, right? The mind is the king of the senses, but the breath is the king of the mind. And so it's really having a tool and an ability to have a felt sense of our experience. What am I feeling right now? How are my legs contacting this chair? Where am I holding tension in my body? How's my heart beating? How is my breath? Where is my breath flowing? And being in that experience, because everything that's happening up here, it's all bullshit, right? None of it's really true. Yet the experience that we're having in our body, that's the truth of this moment. And so we get to tune into that. And that actually brings a huge amount of fulfillment when we're actually here, be here now, in this body. It's a beautiful thing.
That's a beautiful answer and a beautiful question. If I may add to that as well, for me, and just it's sort of like, if we want to take it into simplistic terms, what embodiment means for me is, as Jeff was saying, is shifting from the mind to the body. Is it feels different to be experiencing at that moment than most of our experiences feel like. So whether that is you're doing some form of practice that has to do with your body, or it's embodied leadership where, for example, if I'm having a conversation with my teams or somebody that's telling me something that a challenge that they're going through, and I'm speaking as a leader, I actually feel something different. There's a shift in what I'm feeling as I'm speaking and as I'm leading, as opposed to it being here in my head. So that's embodied leadership for me, at least.
Yeah, love that.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sarah Mack, and I have a question about like the benefits of different lengths of breath work, because obviously, sitting down and doing a short breath work has benefits regardless of how long it is. I'm wondering if there's a time that has like exponentially more benefits, and kind of weighing up the benefits of doing more regular, shorter breath works versus, doing the like longer, deeper experiences, which obviously can like bring up more and require more integration. And, I went through a period of doing like longer breath works. I tend to have a lot of resistance around it because of what it can bring up. And then I found it really supportive to do, a little bit every day. And I'm wondering if there's a difference between, like if you're going to do a short one, taking it to like 20 minutes, if that has, if there's a point where a short breath work can have more benefit, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't know that there's any empirical scientific evidence to really relate to in your question. And so I can speak from my own experience in saying that it changes every day. And so my breathwork practice is an opportunity to tune into my body and to see, where am I actually at? Where is my nervous system at? What is the state within my nervous system? And what do I actually need today? And so my practice changes every day. But kind of a rule of thumb that I like to use is, when I got into this world of breathwork, one of the first things I saw was that it was very compartmentalized. So there's like holotropic breathing and transformational breathing, and then Buteyko breathing and Wim Hof breathing, and all these different modalities. And it didn't seem like any of them had any connection to one another. And so I wanted to learn, what are the threads that weave through all of these different modalities? And so as a rule of thumb, well, actually I'm going to go back a little bit first. What I saw was that there were two distinct categories of breathing, and I call them big breathing and little breathing. And so big breathing are the big transformational experiences that you might be referring to. Little breathing is about reduced breathing, natural breathing, reducing the volume of our breath. And so in my own practice, I like to have a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes of big breathing, but it's not that big, intense experience. It starts out really, really gentle, as a gentle exploration in my body and connection to what's happening in me right now. Depending on the day, it may stay very, very gentle. If I didn't get a good sleep, if I've had a lot of stress, I might keep it really, really gentle. Other days, I might really want to go for it. I feel really good. I feel like my nervous system can handle it. So with the big breathing, that's what I tend to do. And then I like to spend 20 minutes doing little breathing, just getting to know that subtle movement of life in and out of the body, and really bringing what I learn from the big breathing into that little breathing experience. How do I bring that down deep into my body? How are the different structures of my body moving with the breath? And so I learn a lot from that practice as well. And I think both of them are really important to bring into our practice. And then, maybe once a week, once a month, we go out and we have maybe a 1 hour, big breathing experience, and have some type of emotional experience where we're integrating energy and emotions. But we don't need to do that all the time, because we need to integrate those experiences. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for your question.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm just curious if you can share if you ever found sobriety on your journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, I found many years of pure sobriety. And at a certain point, conscious use of plant medicines in ceremonial use came into my field, and that's a path that I've been on for many years now. And it's a path that I choose, and I recognize that there's a lot of pitfalls on that path and a lot of misuse as well. And so coming into right relationship with those substances, with those plants, with those energies is really important. And, I think on this path, there can be a sense of also needing to be perfect, needing to exemplify a picture of what does it look like to be a yogi or a meditator, and this perfect person that has all of these things dialed in, doesn't use any substances. And yet that's not me. I'm an explorer. I like to test the edges, the boundaries of consciousness, of my experience. And so I choose to utilize different substances. And I've found great benefit in my own life and in the lives of other people that I've come into contact with. And for me, those years of sobriety were really important because it gave me a baseline. And it gave me a baseline to kind of look at and to see and to know what it's like. If we never have that experience, then we can never really speak to our own use from a grounded place of having had the opposite of that spectrum. And so, yeah, I've experimented with all the different points in that spectrum.
Do you ever find yourself kind of pushing it too far of a plan?
Absolutely. Yeah.
When you let you back?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think having the intention of right relationship, and also having a relationship with ourselves of compassion and a trust and a knowing that we are going in the direction that we want to go, but that's going to veer off of this kind of perfect path at points. And that overuse is actually teaching us something. It's teaching us to pull back. It's teaching us you're not in right relationship at this time. And so we learn from it. And I like to use the puppy dog analogy, where it's kind of like you're training a puppy on a leash, and we need to be really kind and gentle with ourselves when we're on that path. And so when the puppy goes to smell something, we don't yank it back and yell at it. It's like we just kind of give it a gentle nudge back onto the path. But I think we're living in a really fascinating time where not only do we have exposure to all of these different spiritual modalities and spiritual wisdom and ancient indigenous wisdom from every culture in the world, but we have access to every plant medicine at our fingertips. And so for me, this is a moment of evolution that we're learning and growing through. And so, of course, that overuse is going to be a part of that journey of learning to find our right relationship with these substances.
Thank you for that. That's a whole different conversation that we can get into a whole other episode. It's another episode right there. So with that, thank you all for being part of the Conscious Profits Unfiltered podcast here with Jeff, and thank you for being here at the Kinn. And you all have a great rest of the day. Thanks again for being here. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you like the show, please subscribe or share with a homie. It means the world to me. And honestly, straight up, just hit me up. The easiest way on Instagram, SEBNAUM. Ask me questions. I want to be here as a resource and a source of inspiration. I hope you have a beautiful rest of the day. Much love.